Oh boy, looks like it's Sega time again. How goes it, everybody? Today, we're going to be checking out another Sega Genesis game. Actually, one of the games of my childhood, although not one that's remembered all that fondly, or honestly even remembered at all by a lot of people. This is Radical Rex. So, this was a game that came out in 1994. It was released for the Super Nintendo, the Genesis, and the Sega CD. The only version that I played is the Genesis version, which is what we're going to be playing today. I assume they all play relatively similarly. And what Radical Rex is basically a 2D action platformer. A fairly typical kind of 2D action platformer. But I think it does a little bit to differentiate itself. It's not a game that has gotten particularly great reviews, even when it came out. But I think some of those are a little bit unfair. Although you will notice that one of the things the game is criticized for, and rightly so, is its sort of 90s bad attitude. Everything's totally radical and 90s and whatnot. But these little cutscenes are actually pretty funny, and we'll see more cutscenes as we go through the game. But for instance, why does he have a skateboard? Because it's the 90s. And as we'll see as we go into the actual game, the skateboard is very much a gimmick. Almost seems like they designed the game and then added the skateboard after because they realized their game wasn't radical enough. But come on, the little cutscene, that's kind of charming. Especially for 94, when not a lot of games had that. So here we are. Worth noting that although there is a two-player mode, all it does is you take turns, so yeah, we're going to be going one player. So here's our villain, the mammal. He irritatingly only speaks in rhyme. But he's going to basically brainwash the dinosaurs, I guess. And we're going to have to go defeat him. Apparently we weren't affected by this brainwashing because we were asleep, maybe? I'm not exactly sure what the reasoning is there, but... See, Rex isn't even sure what the reasoning is. Alright. So here's our skateboard, and we are going to use it to reach a secret area, and then immediately ditch it. And although I think we encounter like one more skateboard in this level, not even every level has a skateboard, and the ones that do, you use it for like 10 seconds and then ditch it. So yeah, very much an afterthought. So this is the game. The first thing that I think you'll notice is that everything actually looks really nice, graphically. The characters are all very, like, sort of cutesy and kiddie looking, but the backgrounds are actually, like, pretty detailed and sort of more gritty and dark, which is kind of interesting. It's a neat little juxtaposition, I guess. So if you decide to play this game, and we'll get into how you can play this game in a little bit, what you'll notice is that the controls themselves are pretty tight, and everything controls pretty well. However, one thing that this game's been criticized for is that the ground everywhere is pretty slippery, so you'll notice going down an incline, you, like, slide down. And although it doesn't take too long, or at least for me it didn't, maybe because I played this a lot as a kid, it definitely takes some getting used to. Like, you slip everywhere, and I think a lot of people had issues with that. I don't necessarily blame them. So the basic way that you defeat enemies in this game is you shoot them with your fire breath that you have, because why wouldn't you? And then you can kick them to break them once they've been sort of petrified in ash. Or you can use the fireball power-up, which I gathered here. And look at this, I'm already showing you secret areas for when you eventually decide to play this game, maybe. You basically make your way from the start of the level to the end of the level, as you might imagine. However, once again, I gotta give the game credit because it's not a simple matter of going right to left, or left to right, I guess, in this case. All of the levels do tend to mix things up quite a bit, where you're actually, you know, going vertically, or you're transporting between different areas, that sort of thing. So while the game, I think back in the day, I was looking up some reviews from when it came out in like 94-ish, and a lot of games reviewers apparently criticized it for lack of originality, And though it's not like the most original game ever made, I think that it didn't get quite enough credit, at least for that aspect. So speaking of that, let's go back to sort of when the game came out, what the history behind it was. So this was a game that was created by Beam Software. They were, I believe, an Australian company. They're no longer around. I was looking at their catalog of games that they made, and I really didn't recognize hardly any of them, so I don't think they made a lot of like super well-beloved games or anything. But the original version of this game actually came out on the Game Boy and had the much worse title, Baby T-Rex. Really rolls off the tongue there. Now, I've not played that one. I briefly watched some gameplay footage of it, and it looks very similar. I'm not sure if the levels are all exactly the same, or just, you know, mechanically similar. By the way, let's stop for a second. These little bonus stages are kind of charming. You get like this little cartoony remix of the main theme, and you have to go around and gather the eggs and stuff. Yeah, it's kind of nice. Fairly self-explanatory, I think, how to do them, and the only reason you do them is to get continues. But if you hit the green blocks into an egg, it'll actually break the egg, so that's the only thing you really have to watch out for. But before we get back to the history, I mean, for me, right, in 94 or 95, whenever I was playing this game as a kid, I don't exactly remember, having the little cutscenes between levels sort of gave you a reason to keep playing, because again, not a lot of games had that back then. Another example I can think of was Tetris 2 on the Game Boy, which was a weird one. I haven't played that game in years, but I remember that as you would reach certain level milestones, you would get this cutscene of a weird flower man running or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was, you know, one more thing to keep you playing. Like, oh yeah, it's not like, you know, Shakespeare or anything, but I want to see what happens next in the cutscene. Now you'll notice that when you go to a new level, your firepower is drained, that being the red bar in the top right. And the higher that gets, the more damage you'll do to enemies, essentially, as well as your range will increase a little bit, basically make it easier to petrify them. And then the blue bar is your roar meter, which you can press up and kick, and it will basically do a little bit of damage to all the enemies on the screen, or burst any enemies that are already petrified. It's really useful for enemies that only take one hit, because it'll auto-kill them. Like that guy. Perfect timing, right? So anyways, going back to the history of the game. Yeah, Baby T-Rex came out in 93. Have not played that one. Might check it out at some point. I don't know. But that was the original. Had the skateboarding in it, had the same main theme or whatever. And then they realized that was not nearly 90s enough, so they ported it as Radical Rex to the 3 systems that I previously mentioned. And here it is. So after making Radical Rex, or not even after, Beam Software, right? Apparently their first game, from my relatively limited amount of research that I did, usually when I say I did research, unless it's something I'm super interested in, it just means I went to the Wikipedia page. So that's what I did. But their first game actually came out in 82, so they were around for a while. And as I was looking through their list of games that they'd made, like I said, I didn't really recognize any of them. A lot of licensed stuff. So like Back to the Future on the NES, NBA All-Star Challenge on the Game Boy, Hunt for Red October on the Game Boy. I definitely have not played that one, but that sounds interesting. To going forward, we've got stuff like The Simpsons, Itchy and Scratchy, and Miniature Golf Madness. So it seems like they were making probably a lot of licensed stuff, but then they had some original stuff mixed in there. What I found particularly interesting was it looks like they had a lot of Lord of the Rings games back before, you know, the movies came out and everything. So let's see, going down that list, they actually made The Hobbit, the game, in 82. They made Lord of the Rings Game 1, which apparently is the name of the game. Shadows of Mordor. What else? There's some more Lord of the Rings themed ones in here. Battles of Usagi Yojimbo. That's based on a comic book series, right? So there's some interesting stuff in here. So then in 1999, or in 2000, I guess, they looks like they must have gotten bought out by Atari and became Infogrames. That's what it says on the page. Melbourne. They made a couple Dreamcast games, some PS2 games, GameCube games, and then unfortunately went under in 2010. So there you go. Like I said, probably not a super well-beloved developer or anything, but it's always, kind of sad to see one of those devs go under. So that was Beam Software. I'm positive that I must have played some other games where I saw their logo on the beginning, but I'd have to go through this list and figure out what games those were. But, yeah. Anyways, worth looking at, perhaps, because I think this game is pretty solid. So, there's that. Now, in terms of Radical Rex itself, funnily enough, this was actually recently ported to PC. And I'm talking like 2019, so quite recently, which is funny for a game this old, but what I'm assuming is that probably somebody bought the rights to it and then decided to put it out. So it is actually available on Steam. I think it's $5 or something like that. And for that price, honestly, I think it's worth it. If you like these sort of old school 2D action platformers. I mean, over the course of this playthrough, you're going to get a pretty good idea of what the game's about. But what I think you'll see is that there is quite a bit of variety in the gameplay. I mean, again, it's not going to set the world on fire or anything, but it's different enough, I think, to not get stale. By the way, I guess I didn't mention it, but the reason that you're actually collecting the eggs in the main levels is because if you get a certain number of them, then you will, you know what, let's go around, just for safety. If you get a certain number of them, you'll get access to the bonus stage. Mm-hmm. And now on to sort of the weirdest level in the game. I do love how he spits out the skateboard, though. Yeah, we're literally inside this dinosaur. I'm sure that there's like a subgenre of artwork on DeviantArt for this sort of thing, but it's not the sort of thing that I'm accustomed to seeing. So it's kind of weird. But you will see here, as I was mentioning, it's a little bit more variety, right? We're not even going, you know, up to down, down to up, left to right. We're actually going through all these different rooms. And what's kind of different about this level as well is that a lot of the enemies you don't actually want to attack. So for instance, those, which I guess are supposed to be like white blood cells or something, if you attack them, they will actually split and become faster. So your best bet is actually just to avoid them, because you have to kill them, I think, 3 times. They'll split 3 times and then finally die or whatever. And I guess I didn't mention it yet either, but the music's actually pretty good in this game as well. Each level is sort of distinct. None of the music is really generic, in my opinion. And I would still recognize them, for sure, if I heard them. However, here I could definitely see where some of the complaints came from about the controls, because you would literally bounce off everything in this level, as you'll see there. And so what you can kind of do is hold the jump button to bounce higher and change your direction, and it does take a little bit of getting used to, but in my case, it was just a little bit of getting used to. I didn't consider it to be that big a deal. Same thing with that thing. If you hit that, it will burst and then home in on you, so don't hit it. Worth mentioning, by the way, that this game follows the sparks are a one-hit kill formula, so watch out for that. Alright, we're going to go ahead and hit this one. Once again, those are enemies that technically burst or die in one hit, so we can use the roar to our advantage there. Right. So I spoke about the reviews of the game back in the day. It did not do well, as I mentioned. And we're not talking like, hey, 6 out of 10, slightly above average. But then again, I guess reviews didn't work exactly the same back then, where now like an 8 out of 10 is considered a failure somehow in most sort of game review hubs. But we're talking stuff like 4 out of 10 and, you know, even lower than that, which I don't think that's fair. Come on, I've played some of those games from back then, and those are, you know, 4 out of 10 games. Come on, this is at least a 6, maybe a 7 out of 10, in my opinion. To go for some of the quotes from the reviews, it is consistently flat, unmotivating, and not up to par with other platform games. I don't know. I don't see that. Especially because, like I mentioned, I think the little cutscenes actually kind of keep you motivated. And that's a brain, isn't it? It is kind of funny that the brain is just smashing itself into the ground over and over. And Radical Rex going up with the current science, or at least the current science back then. This creature is actually going to have 2 brains, which my understanding is... We used to think that. I don't know if we still think that about the large dinosaurs, that they may have had a second brain to help control their body or whatever. I don't know. I was super into dinosaurs as a kid, but I must admit that I haven't kept up on the current science, which tends to, of course, change repeatedly, as science often does. So, yeah, there's that. But anyways, we'll go with, they were going for, you know, scientific accuracy with Radical Rex. It was one of their highest priorities, I'm sure. So another thing the game was criticized for, which this one is definitely totally valid, is the 90s attitude and how it doesn't really fit in with the game. That's totally legit. Like, the skateboard, for example, as I mentioned, seems just like an afterthought, like, oh yeah, we need this game to have more of a bad attitude to fit in, you know? So that's kind of dumb, I agree. But nowadays, looking back at it, it kind of makes it charming. You know, it's like those cheesy 80s movies where now they're actually fun to watch because they're so cheesy. Or maybe that's just me. All right, another bonus stage here. I think my favorite level is up next. I think it's possible to get a double there, but I can't remember for sure. You might actually need 1 block per enemy. Well, anyways, that's a pretty easy one. You'll notice even the bonus stages, you know, it's not like you're getting the same one over and over. They're all laid out a little bit differently, and you kind of have to learn them. So yeah, this level has the coolest song and the coolest background, in my opinion. And by the way, that bone version of Rex is not actually in the game. So, there you go. Yeah, definitely the coolest music in this one. You have a nice little bass and synth line going. So in this level, you actually have to make your way from the bottom to the top. And perhaps the most treacherous part of this is that you get this wind that triggers every once in a while and will push you either to the left or to the right. So you kind of have to watch out for that. Especially if we're going to be jumping over, like, this spike here. However, it's not random. It does hit at, you know, set intervals or whatever. So you can kind of gauge, like, if you haven't had wind for a while, you're probably going to get wind pretty quick there. Once again, though, I just gotta say, you know, it's a little bit more variety. It's a different way of making your way through the level. I think we're gonna have to do a little bit of backtracking on this one if I want to get enough eggs, to access the bonus stage, so that's what we're gonna do here. And there's the wind. So one thing that you have probably noticed is that, well, I hope you have noticed it, is that this game is going to be split up into 2 parts on the channel. So you basically, we basically are going to cover the first half of the game this time and the second half next time. However, what the game does that is not necessarily unique, but not something that tons of games do, is you make your way forward through all the levels, and then you actually end up backtracking back through the levels. However, it's not like you're just going through the level backwards. The, you know, sprites and tile sets and everything are the same, but the actual level layouts are different. And although, once again, you could argue that this is actually laziness, because it means that they didn't have to design sprites for, you know, 5 more levels or whatever, it actually is kind of cool. I thought it was kind of different back then, anyway. Guess it's all a matter of perspective, right? So this will actually be our second to last level for this time. Which means that I suppose there are 10 levels in total. Slippery floors once again. Worth mentioning, I didn't actually bring it up yet, the little creatures that run around and just sort of irritate you. So we're talking like the lizards on this level or the flies on the jungle level. They don't actually do anything other than just add to the atmosphere, I guess. Or occasionally, I suppose they could block one of your attacks if you have the fireball. But I think it's just one more thing that adds a little bit more life to the levels, so to speak. Just a little aspect that they didn't have to do, but they did, because, you know, it makes the game a little bit better. And isn't that guy adorable? Come on. Totally adorable. Let's go back down here. I don't actually know off the top of my head how many eggs you have to get to the bonus stage. I just know it's, like, most of them. You don't have to get all of them, and it's not like it's 100 or something. So I just try to grab as many as possible. If we're somewhere in the area of like 90, then I think we'll have enough. And although I don't plan on dying during this playthrough, so we don't really need the continues, just for, you know, completion's sake. If I'm going to do a full playthrough, I might as well try to, you know, show off as much of the game as possible. But definitely never sat down and actually tried to figure out, oh, how many eggs do you need to get to the bonus stage? Or looked it up, which I suppose would require a little bit less effort on my part, but hey. Like 91, I'm pretty sure that should be enough. $92, even better. I gotta say, I hadn't mentioned it yet either, but the little voiceovers are really hilarious. You got this cutesy little dinosaur with this super deep voice. Is that what they call a gap moe? I'm sure that's exactly what they were going for. Oh, there we go. There's the double. But I don't think you can go through to get a double. I think you can only do it that way. I don't know. Mm-hmm. All right. This will take us to our last level for the episode, in which yet another gameplay element is introduced, that being swimming. Once again, I just gotta say, I don't see the whole lack of variety criticism. I just don't see it. We got Toe Jam and Earl 2 style fishes that will give you and take away your oxygen. So that's something. And there's going to be a little bit of a different element at the end of this level in the form of a boss fight, which will actually be the first of many. So Look forward to that, I suppose. And look at that, we actually get to use the skateboard again. What I do like is that kicking the skateboard into enemies actually does damage. That's pretty funny. I mean, it makes sense, right? You don't want to get hit with the skateboard. So once again, we're going to require a little bit of backtracking in this one to make sure that I get the bonus level. Not that it matters, but hey. I gotta say, he always has that big smile on his face, doesn't he? The sprite work, as I mentioned, is actually really good. And the character, in my opinion, is very sort of expressive, except for the weird smile that he has when just sort of walking around everywhere. If I remember correctly, in the options menu, there's actually an option to go through and look at all the sprites, which is pretty cool. Usually that's like either an extra menu or you access it through a debug mode or something, but it's actually built in. And you can see the sprite work in the game is actually quite good. Now, these underwater sections tend to be pretty treacherous, as you might imagine. Not only do you have to deal with the oxygen thing, your fire breath, of course, doesn't work underwater. All you can do is sort of blow the enemies away. And then those tentacles, those were sort of the bane of my existence as a youngin'. Those are a one-hit kill, regardless of your health, so you gotta watch out for that. And of course, since you can't kill them, all you can do is sort of stun them for a second. Tends to get a little bit stressful when you go underwater. I'm pretty sure the scientific consensus is that T-Rex was not much of a swimmer, I would guess. Even the little pterodactyl buddy has a weird smile on his face, I guess. So we're at 77 eggs. Need to get a few more before we keep going. I think I can go up here and take the skateboard down. I remember that I often had trouble getting the bonus stage on this one as a kid. And there you go, that's the extent of our skateboard use for the level. Alright, are you ready for a boss fight? Doesn't matter, we're doing one anyway. So apparently the game was criticized for having overly difficult boss fights. And again, I don't necessarily see that. I mean, as a youngin', I was able to beat all these. And yeah, it wasn't easy as a kid, but there's a definite pattern here that you can avoid. And you can figure it out just from watching this brief little slice of gameplay, I think. Worth noting that you can only hit him while he's attacking, otherwise he has that little force field on him. And the roar does tiny amounts of damage, as you can see there. But overall, I mean, not too hard. We one more? There we go. And so that's it. We defeated the final boss. Of course, I already spoiled it by saying that we were going to go through more levels and fight more bosses. But you also could probably figure it out by the fact that this is part 1 of 2. See the little chewing on his nails because he's scared? It's charming. Ah, he's talking in horrible rhymes. And Rexan? Come on. That's cute. Okay. So I think we just have our bonus stage to do, and then that'll be the end of episode 1. Hope you enjoyed it so far. We'll be back, I guess, next week with part 2 of 2, where we will be fighting many more bosses. But let us gather our free continue. It's not really a free continue. I just noticed the game says collect all the eggs to get a free continue, but you have to collect the eggs to get it, so is that really free? These are the questions that we ask ourselves. Anyways, I hope you have enjoyed. We're just about to finish up here, and I will see you in part 2. Boom, 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 and last one. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.